I move to approve the agenda.
Been a motion by Director Ashton to approve the agenda,
Second.
second by Director Garza. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So we'll get right into the purpose of the meeting. There was a request by the board at our last board meeting to have a special session to be able to discuss what I call our takeaways from the NSBA conference that we attended April 7th through the 9th. I know that in the past we've gone to NSBA and actually come back with ideas, with suggestions. I know that after the last one, there was a policy that was written. And one thing I want to remind the board, we did get we hear a lot of really good information there. Anything that we direct as a board, we direct through policy, so just wanted the board to keep that in mind, but I expect some good discussions about what we learned there. So if everyone agrees, I'm just going to start maybe on the end with Tony and work our way this way as far as our takeaways. Everyone okay with that? I don't know if Tony gets a vote on that one. You're the one who asked for the meeting, so I'm sure they're fine with it.
Yeah. So a couple of things that, some of it, like I said before, some of the things that I learned in this meeting caused me to I have some questions and then some things for the board to consider. And I'm just going to go through my notes that I took one by one. One of the notes I took was in a session that where they were talking about transforming schools to make our school structure more relatable to kids, and they talked about libraries, learning spaces, places where making our schools a place where community members are able to come to learn and use our spaces for other meetings after school. More than we utilize, the community utilizes our facilities quite often for sports and those kind of things. But to my knowledge, and Chris, if you know different, let me know. To my knowledge, community members aren't calling to use our libraries for meetings and things like that, because just because they're not. And so they talked about in their school district, which was Centennial High School in Atlanta, they changed their libraries, for example, so that they were more collaboration spaces, so that people could go, community members and students can go there and do small work sessions, studies. It was set up more like they compared it to a Starbucks kind of a atmosphere where intentionally making it a space where people wanted to come, including students. But and places that were family friendly. They changed their elementary schools and their high schools and everything around, their libraries around, from being the traditional library format in schools. Like they haven't changed really much. When I go to our schools, they're pretty well set up the same as they were when I went to school. With bookshelves and a few chairs around, but square tables instead of round, and really no place to sit and talk and collaborate and things like that. And so they talked about Google, they talked about Starbucks. Google as a company, I think we're all aware, their whole model for their offices is different than any other corporate building at the time. They were kind of the first ones to go to this more relaxed environment for work where it's not so structured. But anyway, I don't know what funds there are for that, and I thought about writing a policy, but I thought it was a good idea to create more functional spaces that fit the needs of our students today, where they can use it. And also, they talked about how community organizations started using their schools' libraries and stuff like that for family functions and other things where because in a community like Othello, there's really not a lot of other places for things like that besides our community library. But, so that was one. The other one that I was really interested in is, and I haven't taken the time to research it a lot on my own, but one of the sessions I went to talked a lot about private-public partnerships when it comes to facilities. And I need to do some more study as myself as to get familiar with Washington state laws. But they talked about everything from districts that are leasing their bus fleets now instead of purchasing them and selling them for $1,000 at the end, which is basically what we do. The buses are worthless when we get done with them. They have no value. Nobody wants them. And one district, for example, they changed to a lease for all their buses, and they're short-term leases, so they always have new equipment. Their maintenance cost went way down. Obviously, their leasing cost is set, and they just turn the buses back in after 2 or 3 years. But again, it's something that we have policies that kind of skirt around some of these things, but nothing that really directs the district. We have policies for sure that say the district should use the most efficient ways of the public's money. But so I thought that was interesting. They also talked about that district, and again, I don't know Washington state laws well enough, but they had instead of building their own facility, they went out to bond to they did a lease to suit. They leased a building, and then they had a first option to buy it, and then they went to bond to buy the building. But by doing that, they saved the taxpayer a lot of money, because a third-party person built the building for them, leased it to them for a time period, and then the school district came in and purchased the building for half the square footage cost that it cost us to build, because of the requirements that we have when we build buildings through the school district. But and I know bits and pieces of how that works, because we've purchased existing buildings in this district that and changed them into schools. We've done that several times. The building we're sitting in was already built when the district bought this building, for example. But what I haven't been involved in is having somebody build the building with the intention of the school district leasing it and making sure that that's legal to do that, because that's what they were doing in their state. And I'm sure there's some state laws there that we need to research. But out of the box ideas that other people are using to help save the public money, even some of it they actually never bought. They just had a need. A community member built the building to fit the need, and then they lease it from them, and they never bought it. But
I know the state actually does that process. They lease a lot of their buildings, and build to suit, basically, and lease back, so you think that the state could do it, the school could possibly look into it.
Apparently VA, I think, in Yakima does that as well, and because of prevailing wage, someone brought it up here and said, why don't you do that? But that was in the middle of the bond, so it was kind of almost too late, I think. But it is a very interesting idea, so has been done here.
But yeah, I know other organizations. I know of a fire station, not in Othello, but close to here, where a private individual built a fire station and then sold it to the community later. But which to me, it would be no different than a school. It's pretty obvious that when you're building a fire station, it's pretty obvious what it's for. I don't know how you build a building and convert it into a fire station unless you built it for that intention to begin with. Ken would know better than me, but
Yeah.
I don't know what else you would build
That looks like that.
that looks like that.
Basin.
But anyway, things that and I rely on our president to keep us away from micromanaging. So I'm just going through my list, and I guess we can talk as a board what we want to do with it. As far as if we want to get more information or rewrite a policy, or if we need to rewrite a policy to get information on these kind of out of the box thinking ideas. But I know like the bus, I know we have a significant financial contribution now where we buy, it seems like we buy 2 buses every other year or something like that with a replacement plan. But, and it's a significant amount of money from my view. Seems like it's 300,000 every couple of years, it seems like. I don't know if you remember, Rob, but it seems like it's right around in there.
Yeah, those numbers I wouldn't know for sure, but it's, I don't think you're too far off. One thing I want to comment about, just to be clear that this idea of building and then leasing with an option to buy has come up before, several years ago, and I think it was in regards to the transportation center. And we were told that that could not be done legally, so, it would be interesting to know, maybe laws have changed, or maybe there's a different way that it can be approached. And as far as the micromanaging part, and I appreciate that, I don't think there's anything wrong with all of us coming up with ideas and suggestions. What I want to make sure that Dr. Hirsch understands is just because one of us brings up an idea, doesn't mean you have to go out and make that happen. And so I would just say be careful of that. As a board, the way we come to consensus is through our policies that we adopt. So if we all hear an idea, we say, we like that idea, and hopefully we'll encourage that board member to create a policy in regards to that. But really, by the time it gets to you, that has to happen first, I think. So I would just
Yeah,
caution
what's
you
difficult
on
on some of this stuff is it's difficult for the board to create from my view anyway, to create a policy that says we're gonna lease buses.
that. Sure.
Because we don't even, just
Well-
because somebody did it doesn't make it work. Same thing with the private-public partnership.
And I don't have a problem with Dr. Hurst hearing an idea and say, I like that idea and he wants to go do, but I just don't, I hope, because you're a doer, and I know you're a doer, I hope you don't feel like just because we came up with an idea, we're saying, you need to go do that, because that wouldn't be appropriate for one of us to do that. And if we did as a consensus, come to a consensus to do that, we should make it very apparent that that's our consensus, so.
And then the transportation thing, I wonder if that was not able to do because you've always been looking at making that a co-op. And so I wonder, under the co-op rules, if that made it not available.
Yeah, and that might be
Right.
why, I can't remember the details of it.
And at the same time, as a building, the bonds are technically a board thing. Am I correct?
Yes.
Not an operation thing. So I think that that's something we could totally explore and find out more without being micromanaging.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And the reason why it resonated with me is that I know that there's some properties in Othello that are actually for sale now that could potentially be something that the school district looked into through the board in lieu of it. In my view, if there's existing properties that the school district can utilize at a lower cost than building new, there's no reason to build new stuff just to build new. But and even if it ended up being a lease, but I don't understand. There's some of the stuff that I need to learn, I need to educate myself on as far as leases and where do you find the money to lease a building instead of buy it, because it's a different, it's not capital projects when you're leasing. And so there's some of those things that I need to get more educated on. So that was those 2 things, and then I went to a workshop that was actually a Washington school, Riverview School District on the west side, that was about, it was all about linkage. They're in a policy governance district, but they talked a lot about linkage and things that they had done. And a couple things that I thought were pretty interesting that they had done, is they changed their, we do school visits now, and we meet with students for, especially the older kids, for 20 or 30 minutes, and the select group, we let the district select who's coming. The thing that Riverview does differently that I kind of liked is they actually do an hour or so, they called it a student roundtable, where they do that, but they just do it at the middle school and the high schools. And I don't remember what size district they were, if they had several high schools or not. But they do it after, not during normal school time, and they have, the notes I had is it lasts about an hour. students come that want to come, they just have a discussion with the board as far as open forum. And if we did that, I think it would be an interesting idea. As a board, we always are careful to stay away from micromanaging, but I think that it's still our job as board members to listen to people's concerns, even if we end up saying that's not the board's role directly, but we can get somebody else to answer your question or point you to who you need to be talking to and all those kind of things. For me as a board member, the school visits have been really good. They served a purpose when we did them. But there's a point when things start to get a little dry. They end up being exactly the same as they were the last time. I'm kind of to the point as a board member where I want to change up our visits to the schools, because I'm not learning anything new as a board member now. It's just kind of like the same as it was the year before and the same as it was the year before that, seeing the same kids. Sometimes I'm sitting here seeing literally the same kids that I've saw 3 years in a row in these schools.
On those forums, did they say if is it just board and students, or is there administration in the room? Are parents invited to that? Did that come up?
It's a public meeting, so anybody
yeah.
can come.
Okay,
Whether they're actually quote unquote invited or not, I think they're inviting the kids because they want to hear the kids' voice.
okay,
But there would be nothing that would preclude parents from coming.
right.
As far as the way they structured the meetings, they were looking, and I went and looked at their meeting notes and some of the stuff inside that district, and you guys can do that too if you want to. It's Riverview School District, and their notes are all public information, so you can see what they talked about and what they did. But it's definitely led by students. In my mind, I don't think they had student reps in their district. From my view, it would be something that if we decide to do it, my recommendation as a board member would be that we turn it over to the student reps and say we want to have a open forum. You guys go get the word out amongst the school, tell them what it is, and you guys get people there, and not have it be the district's responsibility to inform parents, put it all on the student reps, and give them something where they can take the lead on it, even at middle school, if we decide to have a middle school one, for them to be in charge of promotion and all that. But the other thing they did that I thought was good is they invited, that we used to do, actually we did it when we used to have school board meetings at school sites, and we quit doing that a while ago because we do these school visits instead, which I still agree with, having the board meetings here. But the other thing they're doing that I do miss a little bit is they have student-led presentations instead of having the district come do a presentation when it's their school's time. They don't do that. And personally, I'm not sure that we even need that as a board anymore, because Dr. Hurst is required to give us presentations on how the school's doing through policy. And so to me, having schools come individually and give us reports on their school is redundant from my view as a board member, because we're already getting those from our ends policies. But I'd be more interested in the board thinking about instead of having presentations from a school leadership once a year, that we invite them to have kids come in and give us presentations about something that they're, whether it's an AVID program, have the AVID kids come, or dual language kids come show us what a day looks like from a dual language child's perspective, something like that. But have them come here to our facility as part of our linkage for our board meetings. But we used to do something like that. It was still organized by teachers. They for sure, especially with the older kids, they have everything run by the kids, which I personally like, because I think it's good for the kids to not come to the board meeting and just rehearse what somebody else told them to say, to come and be responsible and prepared to, especially as kids get older, to have to present to the board about their school and what's going on. But so I wrote down around possibilities that kids could do on all sorts of things. But the other thing they were doing in their district that I thought was good is, they were doing a pretty good job in making sure that they had, industry certification programs. Some of them we do, but we have a welding program, mechanics program, Microsoft program, which I know we have the Microsoft program here. Our kids can get that Microsoft designation from high school. But the thing they do that I thought was good is they have and this is more of a this wouldn't necessarily be a school board run thing, but they have what's called the Riverview Ambassador Program, where they invite a group of parents once a year to become educated in our schools, and they actually, again, Dr. Hurst, if you're interested, you could look on their site. They go through the qualifications, but they meet 2 or 3 times and have presentations from district leaders about what's going on in the district. And the intention is that they would then become ambassadors for the district's educational, instructional vision. The board could get involved in something like that, but in my mind, that would be more of unless the board wanted to have its own parent action committee or something like that. But the other thing that I thought was interesting is they're a smaller community. They lost their local paper, as did we. In some respects, we have a paper, but it's really run out of Moses Lake. But so they actually started their own newspaper at a high school level that actually got private funding, and they send out their own newspaper that the students are learning how to be journalists. They created a journalism class that I thought was pretty interesting. And they send students out to go to functions, city council meetings, all sorts of stuff, take notes on it, write articles about it, kind of like the Othello Outlook used to be, but just for local news. And there was some funding that they found in Washington somewhere to be able to help them pay for all that stuff. But for their Washington district, I thought it was pretty interesting that they started their own paper to get news out to people, and it's good for the kids for journalism and things like that. Let's see what else there was. Several meetings I went to, they had discussions on short and long-term facility plans. I'm working on a revision to our policy that I'll bring to the board at a board meeting, our policy on facilities planning. I think my view is we need to do some work there to make sure that we have a long-term and short-term facilities plan that's updated every year. The district, I didn't write down what district it was, but the one I went to, they required a new plan every year to be presented by the superintendent that I thought was pretty good. It wasn't necessarily the community's view of what the facilities need. It was more of a district plan of basically, here's a state of our facilities as it relates to instructional needs, class size, overpopulation, and those kind of things. So they had a clear view of what space was being used, how it was being used, population growth, data that we have. We just don't ask for it in a report every year. That you can use that information when we talk about facilities and things we need, so that it doesn't creep up on us. And then the other thing that I went to several that talked about the summer slide and different things that people are doing. Again, the board could write a policy on it, forcing the issue if we think the summer slide's a real issue. There's several schools that a couple different ones, I wouldn't say several, 2 or 3 that I went to were on that. And they talked about alternative school weeks, everything from going to a 4-day school week to year-round school, to combining a 4-day school week and a year-round school model. All things that are, I think in line with Chris's vision of that we want to try to prohibit the summer slide, but things that we could actively get involved in as a board when it comes to how the system's set up. We could get a committee, we could do a lot of things there to try to assist in that effort. But along with everything else that's going on, there's always in my mind the worry of trying to do too much too soon. But with the K-8 transformation that's coming, then there's a part of my mind that says it's the perfect time to be discussing these kind of things, because the district's changing up the whole system as we go now. Why wouldn't we be talking about year-round school now, or 4-day school weeks or things like that, instead of restructuring and then okay, now we're 18, 19, we've restructured, and then we're going to talk about restructuring again. What causes more heartburn, to just rip the Band-Aid off and do it right, or to continually be changing things to get to where we want to be? You know what I'm saying? But I know in our district the summer slide is an issue, and there's lots of ways to solve it, and it's a complicated issue because when we talk about employment, we have unions that we deal with, and everybody has to be on board when you're talking about those kind of major systemic changes. But it was interesting because in the meetings that I went into that talked about year-round school, the only basis that they can come up with that schools in the United States are set up the way they are is because of the 1900s, when every 90% of the United States farmed and kids had to work in the summer, and that's when crops grew. But even in Othello, I'd be interested to know, because it may be higher than I think. I don't think there's a high amount of our high school students that are actually going and working in the fields in the summer. I could be surprised. It could be more than I think. But I personally don't know a lot of kids that couldn't get a year-round job if they wanted to, that have to have summer work. But others may know. I know some, but not. My guess would be is 10, 15% maybe of the high school is actually working in the summer. But anyway, I think it's things that as a school and as a school board that we should be discussing as community needs change, as our needs changed. As far as parents go in year-round school, I know more parents that are trying to figure out what to do with their kids in the summer because they have to go to work than ones whose kids actually have a job. But anyway, that was all I had. I don't know where we go from here with all this stuff that I had written down, except for I'm working on a few policies. But do we want to go through them and discuss these things, Rob, or do we just want to go through our lists and then discuss them afterwards, or what's?
Well, I think that it's important for all of us to go through our ideas, but one of the things that we could do, and one of the things that is on the agenda for tonight that I wanted to ask the board is agenda items for our retreat. And maybe some of these things that we're going to hear things, like by the time it gets to me, we'll see if there's even much I have to add because of the things that have been shared before. The things that are important to us, maybe we can take those to our retreat and really talk about how we're going to put some things into action, and what's important to all of us as a board. So that's one suggestion, but why don't we get through everyone first, and then we'll see how much time we have, and maybe we want to discuss some things in more detail as well.
One I did attend, it was the same one as Tony.
Bring that closer.
One of them that I attended also, it was the same one that Tony did, and that was with the school, hearing the kids more and stuff. And that was one of my keynote notes that I had down was changing, if we could change the school visits to a roundtable type, because I really liked that ideal and what they were doing. I was really surprised that there's a little over 300 school districts in the state, and only 60 currently have student board members on the board. So, and they were really working hard to try to increase that number by quite a bit. But like I said, that's the one thing that I really got out of that would be nice to see in the future is a roundtable discussion with the kids instead. Have to excuse me because I'm going to go back to the classes I did and the notes I took. Full steam ahead. School board effectively partnered with administrators, teachers, and community to launch a highly successful middle school STEM program. And then it got, instead of STEM, it got into more of the STEAM. And I was really, after got back, and then I noticed on the latest newsletter that we had, that they are including the STEAM, adding the arts. And I was really impressed to see that. One of the comments that really stood out to me there at this session was that by the year 2030, we are educating the kids today for 80% of the jobs that have not been created yet. And that kind of really hit what this program's in, and the teaching of the science and stuff. And I was glad that the arts were added into that. I hope that this STEAM is taken in great consideration and watched with this process of the K through 8 transformation, that we don't lose some of those arts that are included in that, which I even classify music as the arts and stuff too. So I hope we take great research in this to make sure we keep those all going. See, improving school community relations and engaging your legislators. This one dealt, it started to get into, by the title, it made it sound different, but when you got in there, it was actually about running more effective bond and the communication that is needed. Okay. And it was really interesting, especially since we went through a bond process, unfortunately, that failed. And it was, they centered around a lot around the communication portion of it, starting in the very beginning. Going back and looking at our own bond, I wish we would have probably spent a little more money into a little more design of our bond to be more effective on selling what we were trying to get the public to buy in on. That was one of their communication. They pretty much followed all the avenues that we followed. Went out, hit all the local community groups and everything else, and I think we did everything right. It just didn't work out for us on that. I got to attend a couple of different ones on school safety issues because of the current circumstances going on.
Plan, prepare, practice, be ready for the unexpected. Looking at our community form that we had, like I said, I think we need to continue with that. It wasn't necessarily the, let me find my note on that. Excuse me for a minute. Basically, it was trying to refer to, we could do all the planning to help prevent, but it's also planning for the chaos that pursues after if you do have an incident. And sometimes not enough time is spent on that itself. I mean, you can plan to prepare to stop, but it's all the planning afterwards. The course was taught actually by an SRO officer with 20 years experience. And it was very interesting on some of the things that he had to deal with. And one of them that really struck me was how we're emphasizing on our plan and how we publish it to our Facebook, and he highly suggested not to publish that plan. Basically, because anybody could get hold of that and they know what could be done beforehand if they were really going to research something. So that might be something that we take a look and address that a little bit further. Communicating with the public a lot again. They used survey systems with their schools on students and getting surveys from the students on what they had felt were certain safety issues. And that's why I asked at one time that if SurveyMonkey could be used for the students in that capacity. And of course, like found out in some of these courses that after you got done, they had something they want to try to sell you too at the end of it. But this one, I did find a very valuable tool that could be used in not just communicating with the public and parents, teachers, but it was a program called Let's Talk. The website for it is www.k12insight.com. They have a quick 3.5-minute tutorial on it, which would be very good to view. It was just a line of communication. It was directed for like different departments of the schools, different ages or grades and stuff. But it was like a question form, not a comment form, but a question form for parents or teachers where they could ask questions, where they could be responded to direct. As you know, that everybody's starting to use these all the time now to do their communicating between the phone and the computers and stuff. And it was just another tool I think that would help for that, communicating with the parents. Another one was high efficiency school boards. It's presented by Valley Stream. Pretty much a school district. It was in New York, pretty much about the same size we are. They were about 4,300 students. But their configuration was 3 middle schools, excuse me, 3 elementary schools and 1 high school. They had a separate board for each elementary school. And then the board for the high school was comprised of 3 members from one of the each elementary boards that would represented for, it's kind of a unique setup that they have there. But it worked very well for them.
Did they say what their term limits were?
No, I did not even. Some of the issues that they run across, for that, and it was kind of dealing with being a stronger board member, and that's something I'm really trying to work on myself. And there was something that we don't think of once in a while is when a board member says something, no matter when it is, whether it's out in public or just in a private conversation, that sometimes it carries a little more weight, or the people think it carries a little more weight. So gotta kind of be very cautious on what we say, and I'm trying to hard on myself to do that too, because it does carry a little more weight. You don't think it does, but it does, just because you belong to a board. And they got on discussions about board and superintendent visions on being the same, which, is pretty much common, or we're finding by now, hey, we're doing this already, which is really good. I'm just going to go back to that. Like I said, this is operational, that the school resource officer, it was really interesting to listen to him, and he actually had 5 Facebook accounts, 5 fake Facebook accounts that he used to help monitor within the high school and high school students. And it's how they were actually able to catch a lot of, or get a little more insight on some of the possible threats or dangers that they had. And it was interesting on the process that he would do that with. He would just befriend a couple of his daughter's friends or something, and he says it's interesting how quick the kids were jumping onto that. And they would get threats and stuff through the Facebook and stuff, but the first thing they did, it was if there was a threat posted, they would actually go to they would make a home visit to the parents and see if it was even a viable threat to start with. And then they use the lines of communication, pretty much like what we've already got set up with the police department and working with the police department. Stuff. It was interesting. That. That's about what I have right now.
Thank you, Ken. Ken?
All righty.
What's up?
Okay. Oh my goodness, where to even start? So part of the keynote opening, what I thought was really interesting was that they said specifically that equality is not the same as equity, and just having empathy doesn't mean you're making it, doing an action. Those two really hit home for me. My first session that I went to was about disruptive poverty, how to disrupt poverty. And of course, the speaker has written a couple of books and made some DVD series and stuff and was pushing that hard. But in his books, they went to high-performing schools and they were able to, he had specific criteria on how they found these high-performing schools, like in low poverty areas. And one of the things that we talked about in our little breakout group during that was to do a poverty simulation. Someone that is in Illinois, she would go to different groups and have them go through a poverty simulation, and that really was interesting because we all think that we might understand poverty or understand different aspects of poverty, but she encouraged community leaders and elected officials to go through this poverty simulation, and that changed their outlook on the way they looked at these different things. So she gave me her card and of course said, contact me and I can get you in touch with how they do this. But it was like I think it was like a 9-week session, and they had to commit to like 15, you were set up into families. And I think you had to commit to like a 15-minute email time conversation kind of a thing twice a week to get into these poverty simulations. And they put teachers in them and stuff. And so then one of them was like, your school just washed away in a flood. What are you going to do next? And I thought, well, that doesn't really apply to us, but it was an interesting concepts to really understand things a lot better. And they said that they have 3 practices that they follow: was to ask questions, to use data, and to build relationships. And then they brought up they showed a YouTube video of a high school girl. I don't even remember where she was at. It's called After the Bell Rings, that she made all on her own about students at her high school. And they were just, you just saw the middle section of their body, and they were holding postcards that wrote something that was really hard for them that they were dealing with at that time. My dog just died. My grandpa just got terminal cancer, and we're dealing with that. And so you didn't even see the students' faces. It just talked about these different things that they were dealing with. And do you even know what's going on with people around you right now? And hers said at the end, she showed her card, and it was like, we don't have any money for groceries for this week. I don't know how we're going to eat as a family. And then it actually panned up to her face, and she said, do you even know what's going on with the students in your classes, with your fellow friends in the hall, and those kinds of things? It was really interesting to see that. And she said, this isn't even the hardest thing that I'm dealing with right now. And so it was a really interesting concept, and I thought that would be really interesting to try to do that and have fellow students see that. And that brought into a whole idea for me of, I know that students can go to their counselors and talk to them specifically about these things, but are there do we currently have counseling groups where they all get together and they can share some of their experiences, but be supported by each other, that are fellow students, and have maybe one person that actually knows how to deal with these things in the room, kind of saying, these are some other supports in the community that you can go to for those kinds of specific things. But it was all about relationships and having a sense of belonging, and fostering healthy, supportive, and safe learning environments was pretty much what the rest of it was, and those kinds of things. And then another one was called Stop Doing What's Not Working. And I couldn't get past the person's voice for very long in that session. But she did use gonoodle.org or .com. And so we all had to stand up and try to catch flies. And then we had to slash fruit in live person, like we were doing it so that we could get some blood moving around. And she talked about how these are great things to use in your classroom, or, you know, for teachers to be able to use in their classrooms. And I know some teachers use many different things like this when they see that their students are having a hard time. But she kind of hit on PE can happen in a classroom, that it doesn't have to be in a gym or outside, were kind of some of the little things that she was hinting at as well, which I'm not saying that that's what we need to do, but it was an interesting concept for me to think about that way. They also talked about translating into Spanish, having all of your information. So I actually went to our website and discovered there is a little tiny translate button that you could translate everything into, and you can pick your language, although Spanish is way down that list. I also went to one that was about space and redesigning a classroom space, a library space, those kinds of things. This guy also wrote his own book, a couple of different ones. And his were really interesting. I'm going to have to look that up. I have them on set up in my Amazon account, but I haven't. But the space tells a story. And one of the things at the front door, he said, you know, when you walk into a building, are you showing people that you want them to be there? He pointed out that when he walked into, because he'll do all kinds of consulting or just complete redesign to all different versions. And that when you walk into a building, think about how many times do you see the word no on the walls, on the front door, all of those kinds of things. You can't do all of these things, and how inviting is that for people when they see the word no so many times? And so he had said something like, we love visitors, and our secretary loves them too, so please see her first. It just changing the way that you say those things. His version was put makerspace in classrooms, don't have it as a separate space, but it should be in every classroom, and having great engagement spaces, and that increases learning, and that they're all designed to impact learning, and how there's all these different kinds of mindsets for teachers currently, the Pinterest, the decorator, the designer, those kinds of things. His principles around student design were: 1, be student focused everywhere, not just in a classroom, in the hallways, in the bathroom, all those kinds of things. Think of students are humans was number 2. Number 3 was do it with students, not for students. Get them engaged and thinking about those kinds of things. And then number 4 was equity in space design. He did not think that there needed to be a desk for every student. He doesn't think that that's an equivalent thing. How many times, and then I went home and asked my kids, how many people were absent in your class today? 2? Okay. And you have enough seats for every student? Yes. How many were absent yesterday? And they were like, 1 or 2. So his concept was take out more desks. He doesn't like the rows and the columns and everything like that. And I really loved all of his ideas until I talked to a parent when I got here, and she said, yeah, but think about your where you work now. Not everything is Google or Starbucks. And so it kind of deflated my bubble. I was so excited about these ideas, but it was still an interesting idea. She was like, I don't want my kids to go to class and sit in a couch with other people. They need to know that there's still desks in the world. So it was interesting to hear those kinds of things. But this person said, the lecturer, not the parent, said that there are 3 needs in every classroom. You need space for story, you need space for feed, and he equated that with learning, and a cave for quiet time, so that a student, if they choose to put themselves in a cave, and he actually had like a closed off space, they could, if they realized they needed to step away and have a quiet moment or something, that they could, or if a teacher needed to put a student in that space. Having sons, and all of them having ADD or ADHD in some form or another. Some of them in our IEPs and 504s are specific, put this kid in the front of the classroom. One of my sons, I don't have that set up that way. And so consistently in every single one of his elementary classes, he was in the back of the classroom because he's a fidgeter and he's standing and moving and constantly those kinds of things. But something that he said was students lose 40% of the input that's given to them after 4 rows back. And so I thought, oh yeah, my kids always pass that one. So it was just different kinds of things that he thought that way. He showed lots of different photos and he has lots of different photo access. Thinkboard.com, I think, was one place that he said whiteboard tables where you can write on every surface is something that you can write on. One of his friends is a math teacher at a high school, and he took out all of the chairs in his classroom and made all of his walls whiteboard. So the students had to stand, and sometimes he would assign, you two are standing together so you guys can work together on this and those kinds of things. So they were constantly working in that class, and he would stand in the middle. And there was never a chair. Everybody had to stand all the time. And he said the first quarter the students hated it. But after that, they didn't ever want to go back to their regular classrooms because it was so engaging, and they truly understood the material because they were constantly working that material, and it was not just a brain to hand thing. It was it became a whole body thing. So that was, and I would hate that class, but that was a really interesting idea. That wouldn't work well for me. But something he said is every student has to visually process every room, every day, every item. And so I went in kind of thinking, oh yeah, we need to have these great, like different colored walls and all of these things. And he really was talking about it needs to just be a boring space, but redesigned in different ways. And so it just totally changed the way I was looking at different things. Let's see. I took a lot of notes on that one. I don't know who it was that said this, but I thought that it was really interesting that some other school board member or superintendent that I was talking to changed how they did funding. The school board had some control over wish lists. The concept that most, I know the elementary schools fundraise and have some control over that. If there was seed money somehow for teachers to be able to come to the district, to the board or to some entity and ask for those kinds of things, or to get some kind of funding, outside funding for some of those kinds of things. So all they had to do was say, here's my proposal, and then not a grant writer, but someone else basically sent it in for them, those kinds of things. And then I think the last idea was a teacher sharing library. Do we have a teacher sharing library within the district where many teachers have a lot of different informational books already on education and on teaching, and I know, Chris, you have an extensive library on those kinds of things, but that they could, without specifically, if they're looking for a specific book, just finding it within the district, that they could check out on their own. So like a teacher library for teacher material, so they could do their own research and find some of those kinds of things.
I do know that library. We'd have to check in with the individual librarians. The way that it came about several years ago at Othello High School was the principal decided that those books would be more useful in that sort of setting rather than on a shelf in the office. And so those are, the high school librarian, Colette Simpson, has access to a bank of text that folks can check out and access.
Great. Okay, good to know. And then the last thing was on in the airport on the way home, I accosted the Toppenish superintendent about his policy on, safety. And he did say he'd be willing to come and talk to us and answer any questions. I think I shared before, it's like a 11 or 21 page school safety policy that they have. They are the ones that carry guns. And I mean, it's super specific. He only allows 9mm. He's very just specific to the point of what kinds of bullets can be used. He has to approve all, they have to apply. It's a volunteer thing. It has nothing to do with their contracts. I think he said administrators only. He did share that every single school, they have the same, like 4,500 students, similar to us. And I think the same number of one middle, one high, they might only have 3 elementaries, something along those lines. There is someone at every single school. They do not have an SRO anymore. They were constantly fighting, even though their school district paid 100% for the SRO, they were constantly fighting with the police department taking the SRO off campus and using them for their own needs. It did not sound like the relationship that we currently have with our police force or sheriff's department or anything like that. We're much better that way. And he actually did it after Sandy Hook. As Sandy Hook was happening, he started writing it. And so it's been around for quite some time. It's only been more public the last few years. And they do not have an SRO anymore. Now they contract with an outside security company to supply security guards at each school. They pay their salary, and each of them carry weapons as well. So I think it turned out to be 20 known guns among their 7 schools. And I'm not saying that that's the route that should be taken. I'm just saying it's a very interesting thing to talk about and to find out more, I think, more than anything, because I'm not sure I'm ready to go that route. Although we have a policy that says that that's an option. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Jen. You're up, Mike.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'll try to. Rob once told me that the preacher in me comes out when I start speaking. I'll try to keep him inside. But I want to start by giving ourselves a pat in the back. We had a short debrief in San Antonio, and just the time that we're spending now brings, to me anyway, brings to light the importance of our role as directors. If we're paying attention, we've discussed things from enrollment, curriculum, different spaces, configuring, customizing spaces for children to optimize their learning, school safety, and the list goes on and on. And just to think that our opinions or our 2 cents worth are help inform everything about this is something that we should be proud of. So I just wanted to commend all of you for that, first and foremost. These things, when you go to a national conference, it does get dangerous, like we've said before, because you're listening to ideas and things that are going on elsewhere all around the nation, and you do think, okay, that's New York, that's, Illinois, this is there, that doesn't apply to Othello. But everything applies to everywhere, whether we want to believe it or not. If we think that because we're in the Great Pacific Northwest, these things aren't already here or headed here, I think we've just been fortunate that they haven't been to the extent as other places. But the first session I went to was, I didn't know, I chose it because I thought it was a funny topic. It was how to deal with negative people and not become one. And I thought, okay, we had just been through a meeting where there was pros and cons discussed about a potential transformation, the K-8 thing, and I wouldn't go to the extent of call anybody negative or say that their opinion is negative. So I didn't really know what this was going to be about. Their description wasn't very specific, but come to find out that we may think Jen asked a lot of questions, which is fine. This dealt with board members at each other's throats, with board members publicly throwing the superintendent under the bus, the assistant superintendent, thinking that the finance guy was embezzling money. I mean, it was like all over the board, and now one negative person or a negative team could just disrupt everything, right? So it was a good session on how to deal with those things, how to address them, how to not be caught in listening to somebody who theoretically was negative and become a negative person, which I don't think is what's going on here. But I thought, okay, I'll go listen to this and see if I can learn to better address the concerns of these people that have some thoughts and concerns about our configuration. But it was a very insightful session. I did email myself the entire presentation, and I think one of these days we'll share them. Very interesting. I attended several sessions on how to effectively run our meetings, being a little more precise with Robert's Rules of Order. And I made a commitment to our president to never use so moved. So I will restate my motion and do it appropriately. It was interesting. Sometimes we do things that we think are correct, but there's a lot of technicalities to Robert's Rules of Order that I think as a group we're working on it, and we're making great strides there. I did attend a school safety session. I believe the gentleman Ken's talking about was a former SRO, and of course, he's trying to sell his consulting practices or whatever. I was looking, trying to find, I liked his page, and it's amazing how he'll have 2 or 3 posts a day of stuff that's going on, negative stuff at a school nationwide. We hear, unfortunately, about the tragedy, the tragic events, but there's stuff going on every day. And that's why I say we've been fortunate, not to minimize a few of the scares that we've had here. But to the extent where, and I'll find his page and share it with you all if you guys want to like it too. It's almost like, oh my God, there's something else. Safety needs to be at the forefront. Jen mentions the Toppenish gentleman willing to come and discuss his situation. We as a board are still discussing, what's our next move after our safety forum. So it's just a myriad of things that we can still do. And I know Dr. Hurst and his team are trying to perfect or improve on our plan. I went to a session on ethnic studies. And I think this particular session was a little too specific to a certain demographic, and it was almost like a little political. So I listened. I didn't take very many notes because it was, like I said, too specific. I did go to rural education does not have to be done in isolation. And what was interesting to me, it reminded me of something that when Dr. Hurst applied, he mentioned bringing millions of dollars like he did in Oceanside from partnerships with companies and all this other stuff. And he mentioned forming a nonprofit and getting millions of dollars from McCain's and Simplot and all the big enterprises we have. And I thought, you know what, if that's still on the table, that could help towards this. Isolation doesn't have to be alone. Our demographic almost mandates that we do, to a certain extent, be specific with them and translate this stuff and everything else. And I know that from a financial standpoint, we as a district may not be able to do those things on a standalone basis, but partnerships was the main thing at that session, that you could partner with different corporations or associations to help these things come to fruition. And again, just like Jen said a while ago, our role is so complex. It really is, because you hear about a mom that doesn't want their kid on a couch, and that's not going to teach them something. Well, it is going to teach them something according to the research, according to the studies that have been done, and dealing with that mom that says no. And I know to a certain extent that is, or not to us, it is operational. And Chris and his team who are here, thank you. John, who's also in attendance. They're the ones that have to, if we through policy enact something like this, make sure it comes to fruition. So they got a big role to play here. But again, I can't stress enough to the public that's listening that your taxpayer dollars are well spent when we attend these things, because although today these may be ideas, they may be thoughts, they are all with the intent of making the Othello School District the premier educational institution that we're striving to be. And they affect every student every day. So we learn a whole bunch. Tony says, is it the right time to enact on these things or to act on them or not right now? Some things perhaps, some are maybe for the drawing board and are years away. I don't know. But it's important to bring them out. I don't know, Talia, if we can do it. I emailed her. It's like, I believe, a 4-minute video. It's about change. You guys have probably seen this already. It's a school district in Illinois, and that'll be my closing comment. So if we're doing it for the right reasons, it's all going to work out.
All right, thank you, Mike. So I guess I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of being the last to go is I don't have to have as much to talk about because you guys all brought up some really good points. Some of the things that I'll mention, we're touched on a little bit, but I'll just kind of my take on it. My goal was to try to find sessions that were given by school districts so I could actually hear what has worked for them. I tried to keep it in a population that was similar to ours as far as student enrollment as well. And I tried to avoid some of the ones that I thought might be a sales pitch. Sometimes even when you try, you fail at that. But one of the things that hit me, it's interesting when you choose them, you don't always get a great description of what it's going to be about, but then you go and you're like, something must have drawn me to this because it's really fitting into what's going on in our district right now. One of the sessions I went to that really struck me was the Yorkville, Illinois school district. About 3 years ago, they had, so I believe they have a board of 5 as well, and they had 3 board members who really felt like it was time for some drastic change on how they were educating their students. And it was really 3 against 2 though, and 2 liked the status quo, liked the way they were going, and these 3 decided we want something different. I believe that was about the same time that they hired what I think what sounded like was probably the assistant superintendent as their full-time superintendent. And that change came from the top, came from the board. But luckily that superintendent was on board with it. It was different in our district, right? That we hired a new superintendent who has these ideas that fit within our vision for our district. But then we as a board, it's up to us whether or not we're supporting the changes. But their changes were massive, and it happened in 2015. They came up with this plan, and essentially after 3 years, they're almost fully implemented in this plan. It's incredible, even one of them being one-to-one with their devices. that made me feel good in that they were able to make these changes in a short amount of time. Their classroom spaces are totally getting redesigned, their libraries redesigned, maker spaces. I think for me, yeah, talking about maybe maker space and that might get operational, but for me, I just think that we as a board, I think that Dr. Hurst obviously is already going that way. We as a board have the opportunity to just give our support and, hey, continue to be innovative. If you think that our traditional classroom isn't the way you see it in the future, then it's up to us as a board to make sure we're there to support that, not only in the idea of it, but financially, if there's some, it's gonna cost money to make those changes. So those are things we can operate as from a board perspective. It interests me, Tony brought it up, and I heard in one of the sessions that I went to as well, the whole idea of how a traditional library is. So many things we do, it's because it's been done that way for years and years and years, and for some reason, we don't, as a system, want to change. But libraries becoming classrooms, where they're collaborative areas, like Tony was saying. As we go forward, we're going to have some challenges. We know that we have the same amount of students and the same amount of buildings, so we still need more space, but we're going to have some challenges as we do this reconfiguration. And I just think it's important, if we as a board feel like we're willing to allow changes in our spaces to accommodate this reconfiguration, we need to be very clear with our superintendent and his staff about our support of that. And if we're not supportive, then we need to be clear about that as well, so that he knows going forward he's not going to be kind of having to fight with us on those changes. The whole idea of the summer slide went to one session. I think that Jen and Tony were both at that one. I've always understood the summer slide as, yeah, that's when my kids goof around all summer, and even though we want them to read a lot, they don't necessarily, because they're having fun, and they come back in the fall and they lost a little bit. But I never heard it from a perspective of I guess more from a poverty perspective, right? So in this, they had this example that totally hit home with me. She had two people stand up.
I think you should actually do the example, Rob, so
We do-
everybody can see it.
All right,
Just
that's a
get
great idea.
Chris, and, because it's hard to envision until you
It
do
is.
it.
Right.
And the other board members
All right,
weren't here,
so-
neither was the staff.
Tony, should you and I be the walkers and he's the?
No, I was thinking the district should be the walkers.
Okay.
I was gonna, yeah, we
Fine.
just need two. We just need two of you guys. If you could stand up, we'll lay this out. So, yeah, start right over there, Pete, where you're at, and you're gonna be heading this way, right? So, the idea of summer slide that they had, they found that most of their students, when they came into kindergarten, they really performed well. By the end of kindergarten, most of them were at grade level. And so she said, so we'll just say, Pete, you represent a middle, well, you don't go yet, I haven't told you what to go yet. You're starting there. So you represent the middle class family, and Sandra will say you represent maybe a family who lives in poverty, okay? And so summertime comes. You're at the end of your kindergarten year, you're pretty level with each other. Summertime comes, Pete, your family takes you to a museum, maybe a zoo. You have some opportunities in the summertime to learn, and you take a couple steps forward. Sandra, you don't have those opportunities, and you're busy trying to keep things going at home. Your parents might both work, and they're gone all day. You don't have a lot of opportunity to learn, to go to the library or anything like that. So actually, you lose a couple over the summer. Next year comes, and everyone's in the same environment again, and you learn a lot, and you do well together, and so both of you take 3 steps forward. All right, so now that was the end of first grade, and the same thing happens. Pete has some opportunities in the summer. He gets to take 2 steps forward. Not so much for Sandra. She takes 2 steps back. So now we're at the beginning of second grade. You both are together. You get 3 steps forward. So both of you take 3 steps forward in that school year. Now, summertime comes again. Pete, you get to take 2 more steps forward because you'll be your opportunities in the summer. Sandra, you take 2 back. Now we're at the end of third grade, right? So, or in a second. So now we're starting third grade. Both of you take 3 steps forward. And now summer after third grade, take 2 more, Pete. Sandra, you take 2 back. So this is where it hit me, was not, I looked at it, the situation with all kids kind of being the same. Everyone lost a little bit. I didn't look at the fact that, you know, my child probably only loses a little bit in the summer, whereas, and maybe even gains, whereas some of the other children in our district, they're seriously gonna lose. And that's why I think we see our stuff, the same thing for us. Our kindergarten scores look pretty good, and then by like third grade, we see a dip, right? And then it starts to come back up, and then it dips again. And I think that what it meant for me is Dr. Hurst being focused on this summer slide and ideas for summer is so important. And I'm okay with if our financial situation in the district makes it so my boy's not included, my daughter's not included. I'm okay with that because I know that they have opportunities in summer that I can give them. And I think it's important that we're making sure the kids who don't have those opportunities are going to be able to get opportunities to slow down or reverse that summer slide here. So I know Dr. Hurst has talked about that, so I'm looking forward to seeing what his ideas are with that. I don't think that I had more to add to that than what you guys have already added. I think that,
I do have one request.
yeah,
Talia, on that same presentation I sent you, the video I was wanting to do was understanding change. I think that's something we should look at because we are gonna enact such a big change. And I think we should look at this. If you scroll down, yeah. A little more. Right there.
Good too. So, before we go on to, as a board, kind of talk about what we feel our next steps are, I'd also like, Dr. Hurst was able to be there with us. I wanted to hear his takeaways as well.
So I'll share, I certainly did not have the opportunity to be in all of the sessions as the board was, but I think one of my big takeaways was the summer slide, but also just sitting here listening to the board, just sharing that there were certainly things that resonated with me that make sense in the direction that we're headed, that also aligns with the ends, but I also wanted to share just some of our processes. But first, let me just share some of the things that resonated with me, that we are moving in this direction. So one of the things I heard first and foremost from Tony was transforming schools to make the school structure more relatable to kids. I think that's a big part of our vision, and how can we look at spaces. And I heard the term maker spaces also. I think one of the pieces that we have not really looked at is all spaces, including libraries, and looking at those spaces being more relatable to kids and more comfortable to kids. But certainly that's part of our vision and our progress. There was also a mention by Tony about looking at properties that are currently for sale, not necessarily building new. I think that's part of our work that we're engaged in right now. We have individuals that's working on those components. There's a piece also that was mentioned by Tony that really aligned with pathways, which really dealt with industry certification. That's something that we're certainly interested. So when our kids do graduate with their capstone course, that they have a certification, they can move on to a trade or a career. I think the biggest takeaway for me that we've mentioned several times is the summer slide. And just like Rob just mentioned, I shared a video immediately with Pete, and I'm sure he shared it with the teaching and learning team from Brian Williams, that actually described the same effect. And the distance or the gap that exists between those two families, those two households. So that's something we're certainly interested in right now and engaging in, and it makes sense in the direction that we're headed. Ken, you mentioned about successful STEAM programs. I think all of our work, especially the work specifically with David, but especially Jessica, is aligned around successful STEM and STEAM, but also there's a very specific rubric that we have where we're moving all schools in that direction. So I think the directors will see that, and also the community will see that. You also mentioned, Ken, about the school safety plan, plan for prevention and chaos, prepare and practice. I think that's one of the things that we are certainly doing. I've seen Greg really step up in that area. So I think you'll continue to see that as we move forward. Excuse me, sorry. I think one of the things that resonated with me also, Ken, that you shared is board superintendent consistency relationship. And I think that's a piece that we have enjoyed, and I certainly have seen the vision that I've come to the district with aligning to the ends, and we're moving in the same direction. One of the things I think Jen shared that really resonated with me is, and this has been our message, stop doing what's not working. We're really looking at the research also to really drive our direction. And you shared some of the same spaces, designing classrooms, library spaces that really resonated with us. And then Mike, really also talking about effectively ran meetings. So that's one of the things that my executive assistant and I were constantly looking at, Robert's rules. So that's one of the things that resonated with me that we're doing currently. You mentioned school safety also. A big piece that is in our ends that was mentioned, you talked about ethnic studies. So we're not saying ethnic studies, but we're really looking at cultural proficiency, which is part of our ends also. And then Rob kind of summarized some of those pieces also. But I would say one of the biggest pieces, like I said, was right around the summer slide. But I just want to share with you just some of our processes and how we do our thinking as a district. I know we shared this document probably with the former board when I first came on board, and it's a strategic vetting process. So how do we decide as a district what comes in the district and what do we do together? So there is a process, it's a filter system, and one of the first things we do, we ask ourselves the question, does this initiative or program or whatever it is move us closer and closer to the vision, which really is asking, does it move us closer to the end? So there are a series of questions that we have to ask ourselves. We can't just bring it into the organization. It sounds good, looks good on paper. We really have to ask these tough questions, and I'll give you an example in a second. A really big part for me is, does research support the initiative? So I'm a researcher, my team are researchers also, so we really dig into the impact that this program initiative has had overall. So one of the big things for me that I share with the organization is, just because it sounds good, I want to see the impact. I want to see the numbers. I want to see that it's benefited an organization, a school, a district. I want to see it taken to scale also. And does the initiative fit into our structure? So an example, a series of questions that we ask ourselves all the time is, what is it that you're proposing? What is the program or item to be funded? So defining the scope of the work, because someone has to take on all of this. And typically, it's not just district office personnel, it's administrators at the school site and teachers. One of the big questions also is this critical to moving toward our vision and closer to our ends, or is this something that's just nice to have? Another question is, who plays a major role in this effort, and who's actually going to do the work? So this is really big as far as sustainability. So we have to be very careful in taking anything into the system if it's not sustainable. In other words, if we start something one year and we don't have anyone that's going to carry that through, that's the concern for us. So we have to ask ourselves those questions. Where does the work actually occur? And again, this goes down to the district office level, the school site level, and also the teacher-student level also. And then the fiscal ramifications, of course, this is a big question that we have to take on. What are the upfront costs in starting this program or initiative? What are the ongoing costs? Can we sustain this? Do we have the facilities to actually move in this direction? So I will say, and those are some of the questions, but again, we're very careful about anything coming into the district. But I will say overall, there are a lot of things that resonated with me. I've shared some of those things already with Pete and Sandra, and maybe some Dr. Boda also. But I think our job is to take everything and synthesize it through this filter and then come back. But I can say absolutely, the summer slide is a real issue, and it definitely impacts what we want to do for our students. It's something that we really want to take on right away also. So I can share that. That was my big takeaway.
So I think the next question for the board, I mean, at any seminar that you go to, right, you can get excited while you're there and then come back, and pretty soon that excitement fizzles out and the daily routine comes back and we forget about what we learned. But what do we want to do as a board to just feel like as we look back a year from now, we could say, yeah, that was beneficial, and there were some things that we improved on as a board, and it trickled down to we improved as a district as well. And I think that's what we need to decide. What are you guys' thoughts on that? And when I ask that, I mean, just the ideas that you have, like, what do we want to do with those? Where do we want to go from here? Some of it was shared and just was ideas that you heard. Dr. Hurst heard that. And like he said, if some of those resonate with him, he'll look into the research behind it. But there were some specific things I think that were mentioned about what we as a board could do. Put you all on the spot, didn't I?
Well, in this, I should have brought this up a little earlier, but one of the issues was
communication lines. And board communication, superintendent communication, and our communication also with the public. One of the valuable tools that they found that they did is that their board superintendent once a week gave a quick 5-minute blog or email to all the board members, just to kind of let them know that what's going on through the week, especially now with the planning of the K through 8. We got a lot of changes going on. And as you know, all 5 board members here are out in the public quite a bit. We all are in the retail business, and we see people constantly in front of us, and I've always got the questions and stuff. And once in a while, it'd be nice just to be up, because sometimes we hear the things from the public before we hear some of the stuff from the district once in a while. So it just a quick, like I say, a quick 5-minute blog at the end of a Friday or something would be really nice or helpful
So
to
would
help
you,
communications.
would you say different information than what's in the newsletter we get?
We get that once every couple of weeks, yes. Maybe what's went on or what not necessarily changes our operational portion of it, just kind of information that we could expect. That our public's going to get asking us through the week, or different changes that have implemented through the week.
So I'd like to know what the rest of the board feels about that, but also I think we probably need to be more specific with what exactly we'd want from Dr. Hurst. But let me first find out if the rest of the board agrees with that. Tony, what do you think?
I don't disagree with it. So I guess that means I agree with that, I suppose.
Okay.
More communication's never a bad idea, so.
Okay.
I agree, more communication can't hurt, and I think that we all periodically go to Chris, or Chris hears things, and we'll go, okay, so obviously that's been an issue, and can share some of those answers or things like that in that to us. So I don't know if I would want to put more specifics as just more communication's always good. He can share whatever he feels like. This is obviously becoming an issue, so I'm just going to share more info, kind of a thing.
The reason I ask that, because keep in mind that you're still going to get approached by community members
Oh, yeah.
that ask
Oh,
about
yeah.
something that
Everything.
Dr. Hurst
Right.
didn't think to mention. So it's not necessarily going to solve all those issues.
No,
But
no.
No, never.
What do you think?
You know, I would say relevant stuff. Something that we're not aware of. Most of it, I mean, he's done a great job of keeping us informed, but I'm trying to think of an item or two that have come to my ears and like, well, this happened at this school, and, oh, okay, and I didn't know about. Not major things or anything, but there is some stuff that gets to us that we later hear about it. And to me, it would have to be important stuff. I mean, I don't need to hear that they changed the color of the,
Yeah.
I don't know, stationery in the office or anything, but just if there is something major that's relevant that we should know, that he perceives perhaps will be questioned on before it's made public or whatever, just something to that effect.
Well, like the instance of, he just shared preschool information. You know, hey, this is some great information. I just got this, so I sent up a follow-up question email, and then he sent me some more information back about that. So, you know, maybe not mandatory or mandated, but, you know, feel free to share, you know, and it's not the first time it's been, hey, we just got some great information. I'm sharing it with all of you. I guess that.
So that's what I'm asking is, do we want him to do something differently than what he is now? Because keep in mind, we just leave it up to Dr. Hurst to tell us what he thinks is important.
I'm not saying differently, but maybe more frequently.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Got it.
State of the state, 2 p.m. Friday.
Well, only came from one board member, so he knows that.
Right.
Got it. So I guess that what I would then say, I know, it looks like no one really has some specific ideas of going forward, but if there's things you feel really strongly about, and there's a policy that already talks to it, but might be able to be modified a little bit to, then propose that to the board. If there's a new policy that needs to be written, do it, propose it to the board. Some of these things too, if you want to talk about it more, the retreat's a good time to do that, and we're gonna, I'll put the bug in your ear, it's on the agenda tonight to think of things that, agenda items for the retreat. There's a few things that I have that are kind of everything we do every year, but there might be some extra things that the board would like to speak about in the retreat this year. Last year, the retreat, there was a lot that Dr. Hirsch talked about because of his plans going into, he already had the current reality and then what the ideal state was and the plans of going forward in that. Now I think we have a good idea what that is and we're getting reports on it. So my thoughts are this year probably it's gonna be more board-centered retreat. Dr. Hirsch is still gonna be able to share a lot of things with us, but so we'll have a lot of time to talk about things. So, okay, anything else that the board wants to mention about NSBA conference?
There was one that I went to, and I think that Rob went to it as well. It was Missouri, the largest school district in Missouri, I think. And they, in the last, I think, 5 years, had gotten a new superintendent, and he said, we're changing the way we do a whole bunch of different things. And they had, they started like 5 or 6 major new big programs, and they have, I think they said like 25,000 students. Do you remember what I'm talking about, Rob?
I don't know if I was in that one, Jen.
You were right behind me. And then we went to Summer Slide after that. Anyways, Explore, Ignite, Go Caps, Launch. Anyways, they have a department, every week they put out their own promotional videos. They have a whole department that does that. And it's not just the leader of that department he was in education, but the rest of his department wasn't in education. They were from technology fields and all kinds of different things. One was giving virtual course content across the state of Missouri for, and he said, this is the way education's going. Why shouldn't we take advantage of this and be the ones spearheading these profitable things before a for-profit entity does this in the wrong way? We're a nonprofit entity, let's do this. So, and then they came up with these killer names for each of these groups. But they were really these great videos that promoted themselves and that got disseminated information out there. Go Caps, I think, was on how to get high school kids to graduate when they're deficient. And they offered it to local, other local districts as well, for a fee kind of a thing. So they were just breaking even was their whole goal. Explore was their summer program. Summer-long experiences, increased services, and expanded access. And they talked about each one of their different things. And they all had the words somehow related in was this great thing. And so I think that we try to do a good job on educating and people, both our public and our staff, on new changes and new things and new ideas. But I think it could be done better, I guess. That was the great thing about those videos, is they weren't like, I'm cramming this information down your throats. It was specialists that knew how to disseminate information in a threatening way that got everybody on board. Parents, staff, students, everyone within their district boundaries. So that was key for them.
Anything else? All right. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn the workshop.
A motion by Director Ashton to adjourn,
Second.
second by Director Garza. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We'll see you all again tonight at 7.
6.
You'll be there at 6. I will not be part of the interviews, so I'll see you at 7.